On the far reaches of the galaxy, I float, helpless. I am stranded. There's no way home, and no point of going back. I wait for death, not just mine, but the whole galaxy's, every 22 minutes. I've done this 100 times. Where I used to flail, to suss out one last riddle, to make futile grasps for life, I now just float. I rest and I watch. I look to the sun at the center of it all and wait for the explosion. It should be terrifying to be so far away from everything, without a ship, without hope. And it was for a while. But the further I wade into outer wilds, the less scared and lonely I feel. From whatever vantage point I find myself at the end of the world, the sky looks the same. Implosion, and then exhale. Whoever else looks up and sees this, whether they're on the crumbling surface of Brittle Hollow or the shores of Giant's Deep, is with me. As the wave of light washes over me, I remember that I am far from alone. The galaxy is small and interwoven and hopeful. I know this place. There is an emotional resonance to the Gardens Between that isn't immediately obvious. To solve the game's puzzles, you don't control the two main characters. You control time. You interact with a handful of objects as you play and rewind time, allowing the best friends to progress through the level. As you progress through the game, it becomes apparent that this is one final walk down memory lane for Irina and Frent. Tomorrow, Irina is moving away. Every level is a conversation between friends as they recall memories. Rewinding time feels like one gently correcting the other, saying, "Actually, I think it went a bit more like this." Playing the game, then, feels like sitting in on a precious conversation, one that you as the player should be careful to cherish. None of this, though, explains how the game is so impactful. It isn't a particularly profound story. Best friends move apart all the time. It certainly doesn't have the existential resonance of Outer Wilds, and yet, both the Gardens Between and Outer Wilds left me sitting uncomfortably, pressed on by the weight of their stories. Where Outer Wilds dwarfs the player within the literal cosmic scheme, the Gardens Between invites the player into a now slightly too small treehouse. The former teaches us to look up and out. The latter asks us to look down and in at the tiny fragments of memories. The feeling of floating in the void of space, watching the universe die again and again, is grand and humbling. And experiencing the recollected memories of best friends, there in the treehouse they built together, the profound feeling is an intimacy of place. I know well the place of the Gardens Between. This isn't because the story is secretly based on my life. It's also not because the game world is highly detailed like the worlds of every prestige PlayStation title. Quite the opposite, the levels are built from simple, everyday objects relevant to the childhoods of Irina and Frent. According to humanist geographer Yi-Fu Tuan, there are two ways we understand place. To know a place fully means both to understand it in an abstract way and to know it as one person knows another. At a high theoretical level, places are points in a spatial system. At the opposite extreme, they are strong, visceral feelings. When you play the Gardens Between, you will inevitably learn the world in the abstract spatial sense that Tuan discusses, To solve the puzzles and get to the end, you have to make sense of the geometry of the level. The magic of the game, though, is how it invites you into the relationship of the two friends, to know the game as one person knows another, to understand how it moves from abstract theoretical knowledge to the resonant visceral feelings. We should take a quick detour. Gris is a beautiful game. Its hand-drawn aesthetic and its use of color are exceptional. Its soundtrack simply engulfs me in the grief and loss of the story. Well, sort of. I don't think anyone could play the game and argue that those feelings aren't the subject, and yet I felt no particular connection to it. The game didn't resonate with me. Sure, I think the game is a masterclass of visuals and sound, but there is no person-to-person intimacy between it and me. Video games are a medium where we regularly talk about level geometry. At its most basic description, that's all Gris is. A platformer, and not a particularly difficult one. It is level geometry, and level geometry that looks beautiful, but that's all it is. Ostensibly, the game is about grief, and those motifs should be scattered throughout the game world. But they're not really. The emotional nuggets are there at the ends of levels, and nowhere else, reminding you that this really is a sad game, really, even though for the past 20 minutes you were jumping across trees and buildings, collecting little glowing guys, so you could get to this moment that just falls flat. It would be wrong of me to say that there is a dissonance between the narrative themes and the gameplay of Gris. It would be wrong because the two don't interact at all. They are cordoned off from each other. Gameplay from cutscene, spatial from feeling. The player is never made to actually deal with the grief of the main character, only to push her along from platform to platform so that she can deal with it herself. If the player's never made to wrestle with the emotional weight of the story, they never move from abstract geometry to the intimate knowledge of a place. Gris' shortcomings are a good starting point to understanding what it is that The Gardens Between does so well. If Gris leaves the player stuck in the world of geometry, what does the latter do to bridge the gap into knowing strong, visceral feelings? Yi-Fu Tuan's argument is that we gain a deeper knowledge of a place, the kind of knowledge more complex and difficult to put into words than mere points on a map, by experiencing that place. But to know a place in the full sense of knowing requires participation by the discerning eye and mind. Passive experience and inchoate feelings must be given shape and made visible. Tuan argued in 1975 that participation was key to knowing a place. What singular attribute of video games sets them apart from other forms of media more than the fact that they are inherently participatory? Instead of asking us to merely witness someone else's story, we must take control of it. And this is what sets apart Gris and The Gardens Between. In Gris, the player never participates in the burden of grief felt by the main character. On the other hand, if we look at the architecture of The Gardens Between, we can begin to understand how the player is made to participate in the story. Each of the levels of The Gardens Between is built as a sort of contemporary Japanese rock garden. Simon Joslin, the game's level designer, said in an interview with What to Play that the formations of each garden are carefully balanced in harmonic, asymmetrical silhouettes, and that's where much of their beauty comes from. Also, the negative space surrounding the central spire enhances the calming, peaceful experience by balancing the noise in the center. The peaceful feelings of a rock garden play well in tandem with the warmth of reminiscing with a good friend. There is a sense of calm rightness as the game progresses from memory to memory of Irina and Frent. The gardens built out of past adventures are a brief refuge from the storms raging outside. This is, I think, the key to understanding just how The Gardens Between merges the two ways of knowing a place. Each level, each garden, is built out of dreamlike constructions of artifacts from the pair's memories. The levels aren't just random childhood objects stacked in an aesthetically pleasing way. They are unique, and personal to the characters. The player doesn't just see glimpses of memories, they interact with them, they participate. To solve puzzles, they have to play the old Mario-style platformer that the pair used to. They have to explore the blanket fort and spill the popcorn just like Irina and Frent did. They have to actually build and paint the treehouse that the two are sitting in for the course of the game, recollecting growing up together, inviting the player in not just to sit and listen, but to take part in their lives. And so it becomes inevitable that you nurture a fondness for that treehouse in the middle of the city. The memories stored in each level, in a small way, become your memories. By the end of the game, the treehouse isn't just Irina and Frent's. A piece of it becomes yours too. Participation in their experiences demands you go deeper than simple puzzle solving. The game invites you to go past abstract theoretical level geometry and onto an intimate knowledge of place. Because the story is the experience in the gardens between, what was before just a treehouse in some video game becomes precious. This is the magic of video games to me, that some polygons pushed together just so, together with some sounds and some music and a story, can create a profound sense of place. Yi-Fu Tuan almost certainly wasn't thinking about video games when he was writing in 1975. Pong had only been out for 3 years, and yet Tuan's philosophy of place finds new meaning in games. Places, and the intimacy of those places, don't just exist in the physical world. They can be just as felt and realized in games. There's another line from Tuan about the necessity of participation in coming to know a place. But to know a place in the full sense of knowing requires participation by the discerning eye and mind. Passive experience and inchoate feelings must be given shape and made visible. And that is the function of art. Tuan knew the purpose of art in 1975. It allows us to know a place more deeply, to move from abstraction to intimacy. It's not a novel idea that video games can give us a tremendous sense of place. They're simply doing the very same work that art has been doing for all time.